It was
really thought
94
your pathetic
degrees. The
traditional
sun
ways
hung
would
in the
save
sky
you?
the color
Look
of a
at
rusted
you.
penny,
You have absolutely
and
nothing
Corinne
left but your
Halverson
pride.
stood in the
You have
stubble of her
failed
own wheat
everyone, and you
field
know that you
with
are
ash
finished.
coming down on her shoulders like
work.
gray snow.
I won't let you
60
break.
miles east, 214,000 acres of the Clearwater Mountains were burning. At 20 minutes to 6 the next morning, her kitchen phone rang in the dark. She answered it barefoot on the linoleum, and a man she had never met asked her 2 questions. How many tons do you have? And can you prove every one of them is certified? 8 days later, there was a line of trucks backed up along a gravel road above Kendrick, engines idling,
Hold on, we can
drivers
beat this.
standing in the dust, waiting
We
on
are
a
not
59-year-old widow with a clipboard to tell them where to back in. And on the 11th day, Lowell Brenneman drove up to her gate, shut off his engine, and got out of his truck with his cap already in his hand. For 4 years, Lowell Brenneman had been right. Not partly right. Right on the agronomy and right on the arithmetic, in front of 40 people at the Grange Hall in 2017. Every autumn, the Palouse burns. That is what you do with straw. You do not spend money hauling it off your own hill. Corinne Halverson had spent 4 years baling hers and stacking it under tarps behind her equipment shed, where the whole county could drive by and see it. There is an old question underneath all of this. What holds the ground in place? Everybody in Latah County was sure they knew. But to understand how she ended up standing in front of a line of federal trucks in September, we have to go back to the fall of 2013 and to a hillside steep enough that a man could die on it. People hear wheat country and they picture Kansas. The Palouse is nothing like that. It is a sea of hills, thousands of them, dunes of wind-blown silt rolling out of eastern Washington across the Idaho line. Some run at a 20% grade. Some run at 40. Corinne Halverson farmed 640 acres of soft white winter wheat 6 miles out of Genesee, on ground her husband's grandfather bought in 1919. And she knew, the way you know the sound of your own truck, that the county had one unwritten law about what happened after harvest. You burn your straw. Burning there is licensed and rationed, handed out on the limited days when the wind is right. But the law underneath the permit was older than the permit. Straw was residue. Residue was in the way. It plugged your drill, held disease over the winter, made the ground cold in the spring. You burned it and got on with the next crop. And there was pride in it. A clean-burned hillside in September, black and smooth as a cast-iron pan, was the picture of a man who had his affairs in order. The men who got the burn permits had farmed long enough to be trusted with fire, and they were quietly, genuinely proud of it. So when the talk started in the fall of 2017, that Dale Halverson's widow was out there in September running a baler instead of a burn crew, nobody treated it as a business decision. They treated it as a woman who had lost her nerve for fire. Corinne Wagner married Dale Halverson in 1985 and moved on to the Halverson place outside Genesee. Dale was a quiet man with a genius for slopes, which on that ground is worth more than any degree. He could look at a hillside and tell you where a combine would hold and where it would start walking downhill sideways. He farmed those hills 28 years without rolling so much as a pickup. On the 19th of October, 2013, on a rented piece called The Cameron Place, he took a combine across a slope he had crossed 100 times, in a low spot where a wet summer had left the subsoil softer than it looked. The machine went over. Corinne was 51. There were no children. There was a farm, a note at the bank, and 400 acres of winter wheat already in the ground that somebody was going to have to harvest in July. She harvested it. She hired a custom crew for the steep ground, ran the flat ground herself, and by 2015 she had stopped waiting to feel like a farmer and had simply become one. She also became a woman who could not look at a hillside without seeing soil moving down it. That is not a metaphor. It is the oldest argument in that country. Water runs off bare slopes and takes the topsoil with it, and every farmer there has seen a rill open after a hard February thaw. Dale used to walk out after a thaw and look at those rills and say nothing at all, which was his way of saying a great deal. After he died, Corinne started walking out after the thaws herself. Now, without Emil Rusk, there is no story here at all. She met him in March of 2016. At a conservation district meeting in Moscow, she had gone to mostly to be in a room with other people. He was 66, a widower, a broad, slow-moving man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. For 31 years, he had worked for the Forest Service. 19 of them on the cruise they send up a mountain after it burns, to keep it from washing into the river. She told him about the rills. He told her about straw. The most common treatment on a badly burned slope in the West is not seeding. It is straw, spread across a hillside at a ton or two an acre, holding the ash in place through the first rains until something can grow again. Then he told her the part she had never heard. On federal ground, it cannot be just any straw. It has to be certified weed-free, inspected in the field by a county weed superintendent before it is ever baled, tied with the twine the program requires, blue and orange, so a crew boss can look at a stack and know what he has, because the last thing you want to do to a burned mountain is haul 300 tons of somebody's weed seed onto it. Corinne asked how much of that straw there was sitting around. Ready? Emil Rusk took his glasses down and cleaned them on his shirt a while before he answered. He said, almost none. When the mountains are quiet, nobody wants it, so nobody keeps it. Then a bad summer comes, and every crew boss in 3 states is calling the same 4 suppliers on the same afternoon. She drove home that night and sat in her truck in the yard with the engine off for a long time, looking at the shape of her own hills against the dark. Now, let me be careful about Lowell Brenneman, because it would be easy and it would be wrong to make him the villain of this. He was 58 in 2017, with an agronomy degree from Washington State, the largest custom harvesting outfit in Lata County, and a seat on the group that sorts out who gets burn days. He was not a cruel man. He was something harder than cruel. He was correct. The first thing is potassium. Wheat straw carries a substantial share of the potassium the crop pulls out of the soil, and when you haul it off, you buy that potassium back out of a fertilizer truck. On 1,000 acres, that is a real bill on a real day. The second thing is organic matter. The Palouse lost a frightening share of its topsoil in the first century of cultivation, and residue returned to the ground is one of the few things that slows the bleeding. Straw chopped and left is not waste. It is a deposit. The third thing is disease. Stripe rust overwinters in residue, and burning is a legitimate 100-year-old tool for breaking that cycle. On that ground, it is not superstition. It is management. So when Corinne Halverson stood up at the Grange Hall in October of 2017 and said, in front of about 40 people, that she had baled 210 tons off her flat ground and meant to keep it, Lowell Brenneman was not being a bully when he laughed. He was being an agronomist. He was in the second row. The room smelled like coffee and September smoke off a burnout past Uniontown. He pulled his cap off his head and used it to fan the haze out of his eyes, and he laughed. And he said the line 11 different people would repeat to her over the next 4 years. He said, Corinne, you're baling smoke. He did not mean it as a knife. He meant it as arithmetic. Twine costs money. Balers wear out. Tarps rot. And at the end of it, you are standing next to a pile worth almost nothing. He was right about every part of it. And she did not argue. That is the part people forget. She sat back down, but she had already changed her system because of him, and nobody in that room knew it. She had walked her ground that summer with a clinometer and drawn a line on her own map. Anything over 15% slope, she would not bale. Not one bale. That straw got chopped and left where it fell. Exactly as Lowell Brenneman would have told her, because he was right about the erosion, and she believed him. She baled the flat benches and the moderate hillsides, about 60% of her acres, 400 and some tons a year in 3x4 bales, 1,100 pounds apiece, tied in blue and orange twine. She took his objection and built it into the machine. He did not learn that until the 11th day. There is a version of this where a woman has an idea, and the idea works. That is not what happened. In 4 years, not one load of straw left the Halverson place. She bought a used Heston big square baler at a dispersal sale near Colton for $18,500 and learned to run it in the dark, because in August you bale at night, when the dew comes up and the straw is tough enough to hold a knot. She had the weed superintendent out every July, because certification is not a sticker you buy. A man walks your ground with a list, and if he finds rush skeleton weed along a fence line, the field does not certify. And every bale off it is just straw. Emile taught her to build the stacks, and that is not obvious and it is not small. Bottom course up on pallets, so ground moisture cannot wick in. Crown the top so water sheds. He had spent 19 years looking at straw that had to still be good 6 months after it was bought. She had spent none, so she listened. He started coming out on baling nights with a thermos, sitting on the tailgate to run the light for her when she had to change a knotter. By the summer of 2018, she had started making 2 sandwiches instead of 1, without ever deciding to. Neither of them said anything about that. In July of 2019, the certification nearly went. The superintendent found rush skeleton weed along the north fence line and told her plainly that if it was there at inspection, the whole field was out. Emile showed up at 6 the next morning with 2 pairs of gloves and a shovel, and they worked that fence line for 2 days in 90-degree heat on their hands and knees. He was 69 years old. He never said one word about it, then or after. The field certified. In September of 2020, the fire marshal came out because somebody had complained and gave her 30 days to move the stacks back from the shed. She moved 1,200 tons of straw in 22 days, and underneath all of it was a bank in Moscow and an operating line of $61,400 that came due the 1st of March. Every year, whether or not anybody in 500 miles wanted a bale of certified straw. Her loan officer asked about it in February of 2021, gently, the way they do. He said the word inventory, and then he said the word carrying, and Corinne Halverson understood she was one bad conversation from explaining herself to a committee. She drove home and wrote in the notebook she kept on the kitchen counter. 1,900 tons. 4 years. Nobody has asked yet. On the 12th of August, 2021, a dry lightning cell moved northeast across the Clearwater country and put down somewhere between 200 and 300 strikes in about 40 minutes. It had been the hottest, driest summer anybody there could remember. What started as separate smokes in steep, roadless timber ran together inside a week, and by the end of August, the complex was 214,000 acres. For 3 weeks, the Palouse lived under it. Ash on the windshields in the morning, the sun going down orange at 2 in the afternoon. Then, in the second week of September, the fire lay down, and everybody exhaled. And the real problem started. A burned mountain does not stay where it is. When fire runs through steep timber that hot, it does not just take the trees. It takes the duff and the root mass, everything holding the hillside together, and leaves bare mineral soil and ash, and in places it bakes the top inch into something that sheds water like a shingle. And then autumn arrives, and it rains. The first hard rain on a fresh burn does not soak in. It runs off tens of thousands of acres at once, picking up ash and soil and burned timber, and comes down the draws into the creeks all at the same moment. And those creeks are salmon spawning beds. Below the creeks are county roads and bridges. and below the bridges are small towns with a water intake in the river. The forecast that year put the first significant rain on the 22nd of September. The assessment team had 11 days. Emergency stabilization on a burn that size is triage. You treat the slopes above the things that cost the most if they fail, and one of the primary treatments is straw mulch, spread by hand crews and by helicopter, to break the fall of the raindrops and hold the ash until the first grass comes. And on federal ground, it has to be certified. That is not a preference. It is a requirement, and for a reason nobody argues with. You are about to spread thousands of tons of plant material across a mountain scraped to bare dirt, the most receptive seedbed in the American West that year. Put uncertified straw on that, and you have not stabilized a mountain. You have planted one. So on the 11th of September, a resource officer on the rehabilitation side of the incident started calling to find certified weed-free straw within trucking distance of the Clearwater. The Snake River suppliers were committed. The Montana producers were committed, most to fires of their own. The two operations in central Washington that carry certified inventory had sold out in August to a complex north of Wenatchee. Nobody keeps that straw sitting around, because in an ordinary year nobody wants any, which is exactly what Emil Rusk had told a woman by a coffee urn in Moscow in March of 2016. Somebody at the Latah County Weed Office pulled the inspection records, and there was a name on them. 4 years running. The same 6 fields outside Genesee. At 20 minutes to 6 the next morning, Corinne Halverson's kitchen phone rang in the dark. How many tons do you have? And can you prove every one of them is certified? She said, 1,840 tons, and I can prove all of it. Now let me show you the arithmetic. Because the arithmetic is the whole argument, and it fits on one page of a spiral notebook. 4 seasons of baling. 1,840 tons. Twine. 4 years. All of it, the certified blue and orange. $5,704. Diesel for the baler and the stack wagon. $8,096. County inspection and certification fees. $4,140. Tarps, straps, pallets, dunnage. $6,200. Baler parts, belts, 2 knotters. 1 gearbox, $2,730. Total, 4 years. All in, $26,870. $14.60 a ton. The emergency rehabilitation contract, delivered to the staging areas above the river, paid $210 a ton, $386,400. For 4 years, every man in Latah County who drove past that stackyard believed he was looking at $14.60 a ton of stubbornness. He was looking at the only certified straw left standing between a burned mountain and a river. She did not get 11 days of celebration. She got 11 days of work. Trucks and a borrowed telehandler, drivers from 4 states, a staging plan Emil drew on the back of a feed store calendar at 2 in the morning, and one date in the middle of that table, the 22nd of September. They moved every ton in 9 days. The rain came in on the night of the 21st, a little ahead of schedule, the way it does. On the 9th of those days, with about 200 tons still to load, a truck came up the gravel and stopped at the gate. And it was not a hired truck. Lowell Brenneman shut off his engine and sat in it a moment before he got out. Here is what Corinne Halverson did not know until that week, and what he had not said to anybody. The Brenneman home place sat at the bottom of a drainage on the back side of Little Bear Ridge, and the whole upper end of it had burned in the last week of August. He had 800 acres of his own dirt sitting directly underneath 2,000 acres of black. He was not federal ground, which meant nobody was coming to help him. It also meant he could have used any straw on Earth. There was not any. Everything within trucking distance was already on contract to the mountain. He walked up to where she stood with the clipboard, and he took his cap off his head. He did not fan anything with it. He held it. He said, "I need 80 ton, and I know what week it is. And I know I am the last man on this road who ought to be standing here asking." Corinne Halverson looked at him for a second. Then she said the price. The same price the federal contract was paying. Not a dollar over. She could have named any number that afternoon, and he would have paid it. And both of them knew it, and she did not. He said, "Why didn't you tell anybody what it was for?" She said, "I did tell. At the Grange. In 17. He stood there a moment. He said, "I was fanning smoke out of my eyes." She said, "You were laughing." And Lowell Brenneman, who had been right about the potassium and the residue and the rust, and every ordinary year for 30 years, nodded slowly. He said he had been right about the straw and wrong about the woman, and that those were two different subjects, and he had never noticed they were. Then he asked something else, and this is the part she told Emile that night, and nobody else. He asked which ground she had baled. She told him the flats and the moderate slopes, nothing over 15%. She had walked it with a clinometer in 2017 and drawn the line herself, because he was right about the erosion, and she had believed him from the first day. Lowell Brenneman stood in her yard with his cap in his hand and did not say anything for a long time. Then he put the cap back on and said he would send a truck in the morning. She sold him the 80 ton. The straw went on to the mountain in the last 3 days before the rain, spread by hand crews with pitchforks and lifted in by helicopter onto ground too steep to walk. 1,840 tons of Latah County wheat straw laid across burned ground 60 miles from where it grew. It did not fix everything. Nobody who does that work will tell you it does. The creeks still ran brown that fall, but the hillsides above the spawning reaches held better than they had any right to, and the men who measure such things went back the following June and found grass coming up through the mat of it. That is the whole ambition of the work. Hold the ground until something living can take the job back over. Corinne Halverson paid the operating note off on the 1st of March, 2022, and did not carry one the following year. She did not quit, and that is worth saying. She still farms outside Genesee, still bales the flats, and leaves the steep pitches alone, and the stacks are still there under tarps, because the mountains have been quiet since. Lowell Brenneman has certified his own straw every year since 2022. He stacks it and tarps it and sits on it. When somebody at the elevator asks why, he gives them a short version of an argument he first heard in a Grange Hall in 2017, and he has never once said whose argument it was. She has never asked him to. Emile Rusk was 71 that September. On the last night, when the final truck pulled out of the yard and the rain came across the wheat ground in a gray sheet out of the southwest, he was sitting in his pickup at the end of the driveway with the engine running and the wipers going, waiting to drive her into Genesee for supper. He had put on a clean shirt for it. Neither one of them mentioned that either. So, what holds the ground in place? For a season, roots do. Everybody in that county knew that answer, and everybody in that county was right. But roots only hold what is already growing. When the growing things are gone, when the mountain is burned to bare dirt and the rain is 11 days out, the ground is held by one thing only, by whether somebody was willing to keep a thing back before there was any reason to, before there was a buyer, before there was a price, before there was a single soul who would call her anything but a woman baling smoke. Lowell Brenneman was not wrong, not for 30 years. On the plain arithmetic of an ordinary year, he was as right as a man can be. And if you had asked me in 2017, I would have agreed with him. And so would you. The trouble with being right about ordinary years is that nobody has ever farmed an average. They farm the year they actually get. So be careful of any plan that only works if next year looks like last year. And ask yourself the harder question, the one Corinne Halverson answered 4 years before anybody thought to ask it. What are you burning off every fall? Out of habit, because it has never once been worth anything? And what happens on the day it is the only thing you have left?